Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. So, as it is Monday today, I wanted to share another kind of like sketchbook session with you guys. Also, if you're a fellow Canadian like me, then happy Thanksgiving to any of you. Otherwise, just happy Monday. I thought because I did end up missing Saturday's video last week, I wanted to kind of keep today's video more on like the chill side or something that's a little bit more low-key for myself. So as you can see, I've already pre-sketched something in my sketchbook. I used the Color ENO in the color red, and I decided that we are going to be using colored pencils today. But first, let's go ahead and lighten up my sketch. So I do prefer to use some sort of like colored lead, usually something like a red or a pink, something a little bit more warmer if I'm drawing, let's say, a character that has something that's leaning more towards like a warmer skin tone. And then that way none of my lines will really kind of like smudge or smear or make anything a little bit difficult to work with if you want to keep things a little bit more tidy. So we are going to be using colored pencils or pencil crayons as Canadians say. And yeah, I just want to kind of just color as much as I can for this particular piece. So I ended up drawing Kaida Haru from Nijisanji JP, as he's my JP Oshi from that side. And I don't know, I've been just having like a sudden revitalization of wanting to draw him again. The funny thing is like the reason why I wanted to draw him was more because I was talking to a few actual mutuals that I typically find people who are also fan of like the EN side, because I'm a little bit more vocal about supporting them or like being fans of them oftentimes and making fan art. So I kind of like gravitate towards finding other people who also have the same Oshis or like the same livers. And I don't talk too much about the JP side because I don't watch them as frequently due to like language barrier. But the more kind of like sudden urge to draw Kaida, at least for like today's session, was because I finally met like another mutual that also likes Kaida Haru, and I just don't find that many people who talk more about the JP side. So I just got more energy to draw him today. So I have like a little bit of like a crying expression for him, and I just wanted to keep things simple because it's been a while since I've used colored pencils at all, I feel like. Either like in my sketchbook or like other illustrations and stuff, I just don't use them like as frequently anymore. They used to be kind of like one of my number one drawing materials back during like my high school uni days, because I don't know if they were like more readily available in my high school classroom, at least because I was very close to my art teacher and she always had very good art supplies for the most part, and I often spent a lot of my time because I like more quiet areas. Even like till this day, I'm not like too fond of places that are a little bit loud and bustling, which I'll talk about RokuCon a little bit later, which was like the convention that I attended and tabled on Saturday, hence there was no video for that day. But I spent a lot of time just in the art classroom to eat my lunch, as well as to work on projects or try out new art supplies and stuff, chat with the art teacher. And I believe one of the sets of, I think, Prismacolor Scholar colored pencils that I've received was a gift from her, so I'm always thankful about that, and just being able to play around with those kinds of like types of materials and mediums and stuff is always really nice, especially if you're like growing up not being like super exposed to a bunch of different mediums. I think nowadays like digital is very much more affordable, therefore it's a little bit more accessible to people. I know it's not accessible to everybody, but it's getting to that point where there is many more options, and I don't think a lot of people tend to gravitate towards traditional art as much because it does get pricey very quickly because you're using up a lot of materials. I think like graphite and like pencil and stuff will forever be my number one, and luckily I feel like pencil for the most part is like fairly inexpensive, or some sort of like drawing material. But I know like colored pencils or even like pastels, all that kind of stuff, if you want to get more higher end quality stuff or want to expand your sets, it does get very, very, very pricey. But I used to do more like, I did fabric studies, I think, with colored pencils. I've also done like portraiture and all that stuff, or using it to accent a lot of my graphite pieces, especially for like Remembrance Day pieces. Back when I was in school, I would always do like a black and white drawing based off of like a photo or like a photo collage, and then I would always highlight the poppies in like very bright red kind of blacks and stuff like that. So pencil crayons were one of my favorite mediums, but I think it's kind of been pushed to the back burner a little bit for me. One, it's very time consuming, and depending on like the method you choose to use colored pencils, sometimes it's a little bit harder on my hand. And nowadays I've been trying to let my hand rest a little bit more. I know digital, as long as like I'm kind of careful with it, I almost never get like hand fatigue from it, other than drawing on like the actual physical tablet, like the XP pen. When I'm drawing like on the iPad, I don't know if it's just the angle or if I take more breaks unconsciously, I just never really get hand pain from it. But whenever I'm doing like a bajillion chibis or like anything that requires me to do line art or anything like that, it does put a lot more strain. But because of that, watercolor is like another medium that I always gravitated towards. So I do have like a looser grip when painting typically. So watercolor became very much like my number 2 favorite medium very quickly, and kind of replaced and pushed back using colored pencils. But let's talk a little bit about the actual process of what I'm doing for the colored pencils this time around. I think kind of like using colored pencils might depend on your paper texture preferences or whatever you want to use it on, as well as the type of pencils you have. So the ones that I'm using today are the ones that I've been using for at least more recent years. I do own the Prismacolor Premier set, which I think for a lot of people was at least like a lot of people's like number 1 spot for colored pencils, because you can do a lot of I guess like a lot of layering, doing a lot of burnishing, where you can get like really smooth transitions and like blend them together really nicely. But then I like using the Arrtx ones is just because of 1, portability, 2, I guess like the color range, and 3, it's kind of like in between a hardness and a softness for different colored pencils. So it's not as soft as the Prismacolor Premiers, but they blend pretty well and layer up pretty well compared to, let's say, the Prismacolor Scholars, which has a kind of like more harder lead in them, which makes it very difficult for you to blend or like burnish them together if you want like a seamless blend. But I like using the Arrtx ones. It's a little bit low pressure because of like, 1, the price point, and like I said, the core of it doesn't break or snap as easily, so I'm not as like precious with it compared to, let's say, something that's more on the expensive or like seemingly higher quality colored pencils. So in terms of like how I'm layering it, I do usually just layer up very slowly by doing light layers. At times, I think I will press down really hard and try to just like build up the value or try to concentrate the pigment a little bit more. But I don't really do the burnishing method as much anymore, because I'm not really going for like a seamless blend or a very like polished high quality where you need to make sure majority of the white of the paper is covered to get like maximum brightness and vibrancy from your colored pencils. I kind of like the softer approach nowadays. I think for like realism, a lot of people go towards like light layering up until you build up to the correct values and the hues and the tones that you want, and you start to blur and blend everything together to kind of make it like that perfect kind of photo quality finish. But a lot of like my doodles and stuff, I just like to play around with colors. So even right now, for Kaida's hair as well as like his skin, I've been trying to push a little bit more of like this turquoisey blue, because Kaida's kind of like color palette, because I'm doing more of like a headshot and I didn't really include a lot of his jacket, I guess you can call it. There's not as much like contrast and things are slightly more muted. So because of that, I didn't want everything to look too washed out. So I tried to bring a little bit more of the blue from his eyes, as well as like the turquoise from some of the accent colors that he has in his overall outfit and appearance, into like the hair, into the shadows of the skin, just to bring a little bit more vibrancy here and there. And for the most part, as long as you get relatively close with your values, you can kind of like mess around and play around with the different colors you want to include in different places. And usually, because the values are like somewhat correct, they don't look too off. But I think anything that requires me to do line work at the end, I am very timid sometimes when it comes to like adding contrast to pieces. I'm like this way for digital as well, because I do end up doing more of like a cleanup phase where I end up darkening a lot of the lines afterwards and purposely making my sketch lines and some of my colors a lot softer. So then when I have to do my cleanup and rendering, I'm forcing myself to really push the contrast. But it's kind of like a good and a bad thing. I know the reason that I do that is to give me the choice later to pick whether or not I really want like high contrast, do I want to keep everything on the softer side, all that, rather than having dark lines to begin with and then having a hard time trying to cover them up and replacing them with lighter lines. But oftentimes I know that I will gravitate towards having more contrast, so I could save myself a little bit more time just kind of finding maybe like a middle ground and or trying to keep my lines as clean as possible, similar to line art, because at this point I do kind of like shuffle back and forth, like do I want to actually learn to love my line art, or try to sketch in a way that's a little bit more efficiently sound, in the terms of like wanting to shorten the amount of time I spend on rendering a piece at least, because cleanup and rendering does take me the longest. But before I get too sidetracked, the reason I brought that up is because when I use like colored pencils or even like watercolors is almost like a guarantee that I will do line art at the very end, because I kind of like don't use my pencil lines ever as the line art, so I will have to go over my pencil lines with like a thin stroke of watercolor anyways, and that's kind of just my preference. But for colored pencils, you can kind of see like as I'm working on Kaida Haru, there's like places where maybe I think I'm finished shading the skin, so I'll start outlining potential line art with like some sort of like a dark burgundy or dark purple, dark blue or whatever for like the face. I'll start to darken up the eyes. We'll start to outline a little bit of the hair and that stuff. And at that point, I could call it quits and call that the line art and then leave it as is. But more recently, whenever I do like colored pencils in my sketchbook, I do like to push the contrast just a bit more. And I don't really like using the black pencil crayon for, I feel like it's just not as dark enough, and because of kind of like the waxy surface of being able to layer up with these colored pencils, it does make it a little bit harder to get like nice thin sharp lines, unless you didn't get to the point where things look like they're almost like too shiny, getting that wax bloomy kind of effect and not really taking in any more layers. Even though I do find like the Arrtx colored pencils and like a lot of the higher quality colored pencils tend to have a lot of time and are able to build up a lot of layers over time without having to, you know, run into a lot of the wax blooming or the point where you're not able to layer anymore and it physically won't take any more pigment on top of each other. So I've resorted to using a ballpoint pen, because ballpoint pen, at least like the one that I have, is like, I think it's the Papermate or the Pentel. I think it's Papermate. Papermate Ink Joy is the one that I typically use if I want to darken any of my sketches. I use the Pentel like RSVP if I want to do like generic sketching, keeping things nice and light, very much like pencil adjacent. But I think in this video, I'll show it a little bit later once we actually get to the line arting or like darkening up my line phase. I'm using a Bic Atlantis, I think, pen, which I was just testing which of my black pens actually had any ink. Because the thing is about, similar to like using a black pencil crayon on top of just the waxy surface, on top of like, you know, all these layers of colored pencil that I've been putting down on my paper, a lot of like inking materials just won't dry on top of a waxy surface. So let's say if I use like fine liners, sometimes they won't even like lay down at all. And if they do, sometimes it remains wet for super long. So it becomes a total mess because you might be smudging it with your hands, or if you're very careful, but maybe the next time you use your sketchbook, you accidentally like imprint or stamp that ink onto one page to the other because it would never dry. But I find that ballpoint pen just works really well. It glides across really nicely. It adheres to the page. I don't really have problems with like smudging or how vibrant or dark it is. So it's kind of like my preferred method if I have to darken some of my lines with like something like black adjacent, I guess. And I've done this in the past, like in other sketches, where I would use the black to kind of like tie everything together. Because like I mentioned, sometimes I like the softer look, sometimes I want more contrast. I do think having more contrast is definitely more eye-catching, because obviously the contrast, but like sometimes the softer look just is prettier, or maybe you just feel like, you know, you want something a little bit more light and airy. So definitely up to your own preference. But I kind of already knew going in that I was going to be doing some sort of line art or darkening up a lot of like the features in Kaida's face or like the ever surrounding areas. So while I'm finishing up the kind of like coloring portion, I am going to be switching over probably to the inking portion in about like a minute or so. But while we get there, let me talk a little bit about Saturday. So Saturday was RakuCon, and RakuCon actually is my last convention of the year. I don't do too many conventions because I try to stick mostly to local. Right now, it's like I don't think it's really feasible for me to justify going out of province quite yet, as well as like I always like tabling with friends and coordinating with their schedule or seeing if any of them are available. It's sometimes hard to ask them on the spot because I need to know kind of like well in advance. But RakuCon is in my city, so it's definitely more of like, you know, it's a local con, so it's a little bit easier for both me and my friend to attend. So friend A did attend with me and she was helping me table, but she's not like as familiar with the series or the stuff that I draw, especially because I did more of like a revamp and I have like all, at least like, let's say 95% of the characters for both like Honkai Star Rail and Genshin done. I was planning on maybe diving into Uma Musume because I do like that series, but I did not watch season 1, so I don't know quite yet. I don't know if it's like, is it too disingenuous to draw the Uma girls if I didn't fully watch the series? I'm always like on the fence about that, but I think that's just more of like a moral thing for my brain. But because of her not having that much of like a familiarity, because she doesn't play like gacha games, she's more normie, I guess. She's like, yeah, she's a little bit more of my normie friend, but she's like one of my best friends. So and she's always like willing to help me out, and she's thankfully more of a confident driver than I am, so she could drive me across the city to the venue and help me set up. But also just like comfortable tabling with friends is always a delight and a joy. But because she's not familiar with that kind of like stuff or like those games or anything, it was easier for me to stay behind the table and just manage everything. And she just helps me with packaging or letting me know if there's like anyone at the table that needs my assistance, anything like that. But for the most part, I'm like the one front facing the table at that time. My other friend, like friend B, is a little bit more into the same series as I am, and she's a lot more knowledgeable about many other series. So oftentimes if I'm tabling with her, she's actually very good at like customer service, so she's a little bit more front facing, and then I'm working typically, let's say, on commissions, or I just let her do her customer servicey thing. So yeah, the difference between that and tabling at RakuCon this time is that I wasn't able to go walk around to other tables because I didn't want to put the pressure on her, because she's already doing me like a big favor by helping me out anyways. So I tried my best to pop over to like a table or two at the very beginning at the con, but I didn't have that much time. So I do apologize that I was not able to kind of like float around. But I'm always thankful to the people who came up to my table and said that they watched my videos either in the past or currently. I'm always thankful, so thank you. And I apologize, as usual, for two things. One, I feel like I become hard of hearing at conventions. I don't know if it's because of the loud music, but if I have to keep asking you to repeat yourself, I'm so sorry. And then two, I'm typically more on the quiet side, so me trying to raise my voice, if you can't hear me, I'm so sorry. Because I didn't know that was like a problem that I have, is that I have a hard time projecting my voice, unfortunately. So because of that, I think people think that either I'm mumbling or I'm not saying something like directly to them. So apologies about that. But RakuCon was very fun. It is my last convention of the year, I'm pretty sure, and my last kind of like big obligation. So I'm going to be focusing on working on like little mini projects and stuff. I mentioned in the previous video that I wanted to work on a little plush of Selwyn very soon, as well as a little clay figurine of Flynn's. So I will probably dedicate Monday sessions towards those projects, and I'll continue to be working on other illustrations and things to share with you guys. So hopefully you guys guys enjoyed watching today's video. We did end up finishing Kaida Haru. I also showed you guys that I do keep a piece of paper in between my spreads to keep them kind of nice and clean and ready for the next session. So I think that's it for today, and I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye! Also, once again, happy Thanksgiving!